G'day fellas, welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone had a good Christmas. I've seen a lot of content creators doing a lot of end of year content like lists, awards for performances of the year, fighters of the year, what sort of fights they want to see in 2024, things like that. And I wanted to come up with my own sort of list to really sum up 2023. And to be completely honest, I am not a fight analyst. I don't pretend to be. I'm not really an X's and O's guy. I'm just a fight fan. You might even say I'm a casual fan, but what I'm into really is the storylines behind fighters and these fights. So I came up with a fun list we could do for the end of the year, and that is the top UFC conspiracy theories from 2023. These aren't things that I necessarily believe are true. These are just fun conspiracy theories that there's a little bit of evidence that show that perhaps they could be true. I'm going to argue the case for all of these conspiracy theories just to have a little bit of fun. And you guys can let me know what you think about these down below in the comments, whether you think they're true or they're just completely far-fetched. So let's get into it. All right, so to kick it off, we have Alexa Grasso versus Valentina Shevchenko 2. Now, we all know what happened there. The first fight, Grasso she kind of got lucky. I'm not saying it wasn't a great performance because it was, but she managed to get Valentina's back. She got the hooks in and got her with a rear naked choke. Great performance, won the title, awesome story. I love Alexa Grasso. I love the way she goes about it. In their rematch, which we all watched, it was a great fight. The conspiracy isn't necessarily that the fight was called a draw. It's more how it was called a draw, which was an absolutely ridiculous 10-8 round by one of the judges. The judge that scored at 10-8 actually had Valentina winning 3 rounds to 1, and it seemed like he realized that if he was going to give even Grasso the 10-9 round, that she was going to go on to lose the fight. It kind of felt like he was talking to the other judges. They knew what was going on, and they had something whispered in their ear, do not give Valentina this fight. Now, the conspiracy here is, why would that take place? Why would you not want to give Valentina the fight and then get an epic rematch? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Not long after the fight, Dana White announced that they would be headed to the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is like the new multi-billion-dollar venue that everyone's been talking about. He has said he wants to put on the greatest ever combat sports event. Where this gets even more interesting is that he wants to do it on Mexican Independence Day. Now, if you're going to put on the greatest ever sporting event on Mexican Independence Day, you're going to want to have a Mexican champion, right? Brandon Moreno is not the champion anymore. Yair Rodriguez, he lost. He's not a champion. You have one Mexican champion in the UFC, and that's Alexa Grasso. The conspiracy is, and I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying it looks kind of shady, and there's people online saying that this is a conspiracy. Dana White had a word to the judges and said, look, we want Grasso to win. Obviously, if it's an absolute domination, we don't want you to go and give Grasso the fight, but if there's a way you can score it in her favor and we can keep her the champion, then let's do it. Whether or not that means Alexa Grasso is going to be on ice until this massive fight, we'll have to wait and see, but it seems pretty convenient that Dana White came out and said this.
I will put on the greatest live combat sports event anybody has ever seen at the Sphere in September for Mexican Independence Day. I'm so in on this, it's not even funny.
And then you get a 10-8 score from a judge, which was absolutely ridiculous, and gave the fight a draw, which meant Grasso got to keep her belt. I thought Shevchenko won, but it was close. I don't think many people would have really argued the case as much if it wasn't for that ridiculous 10-8 round. It just seemed a little bit too convenient. So that's number one. The Jon Jones injury. I don't really like talking about people faking injuries because as someone who's not an athlete, I think that's pretty disrespectful to do. But I did see some people making content about this injury being fake, and I'm going to argue for those people. And this isn't me saying that I think this is what happened. It's just a fun conspiracy theory, and I'm going to make the argument for it. I understand that UFC fighters often film their sparring sessions. That's not necessarily a weird thing to do, but it is kind of odd that this injury was caught on film. And it's not necessarily that the injury was caught on film, it's the way it was caught on film. This was just like a stock standard wrestling sparring match going on with some guy who we don't even know who he is, just some random guy. But if you watch the footage, the weird part about it is that it just so happens when Jon Jones is facing the camera, and as soon as he gets injured, the guy who he's wrestling with steps to the side, almost as if he knows that he's in the way of the camera view and he steps outside of the camera angle so that you get a clear look on Jon Jones. Again, I'm not saying that this is a fake injury, but it does seem a little bit sus. Now you might ask yourself, why on earth would Jon Jones want to fake an injury and not fight Stipe? In all honesty, I think Jon Jones beats Stipe. I think most people probably think that. It's a good payday for him. But think about Jon Jones, who just spent 3 years bulking up to get to heavyweight. Now, I don't know about you, but 3 years seems like a long time to put on 20, 30 pounds of muscle. Was Jon Jones getting tested this whole time that he was out? I'm not sure. I could be completely wrong about this, but it seems like he spent 3 years out of the testing pool. If you look at the timeline of when Jon Jones pulled out of this fight, it happened 2 weeks after USADA announced that they were splitting from the UFC. So let's just play hypothetical conspiracy theory. We're just having a bit of fun. USADA announces they're splitting with the UFC. Jon Jones thinks, so that means if I don't take this fight, I could fight next year and not be tested by USADA at all. Pretty convenient, huh? Okay, staying on the subject of USADA, we have Conor McGregor versus USADA. Now, USADA put out a statement that made it pretty clear that the UFC was trying to force their hand and get Conor McGregor to be made an exemption as far as going into the testing pool for 6 months so that he could fight. This is actually the statement here, and I'll read it out. It says, "We have been clear and firm with the UFC that there should be no exception given by the UFC for McGregor to fight until he has returned 2 negative tests and been in the pool for at least 6 months. Unfortunately, we do not currently know whether the UFC will ultimately honour the 6-month or longer requirement." So that's the statement they put out after they announced that they were splitting from the UFC. The key thing here is that USADA announced that. The UFC never made an announcement.
It was a dirty move. There was no announcement yesterday. That was scumbagism, what happened yesterday.
Okay. USADA. All right, good.
Yeah.
So was Dana White pushing USADA to have Conor McGregor given an exemption for the USADA testing pool? We've all seen the photos of Conor. We all know he's juiced up. Like, it's not a secret. I don't think he's trying to hide it. If he is trying to hide it, he's not going about it in a very good way. But the conspiracy here is that Conor McGregor is the reason USADA split from the UFC. And honestly, I don't even know if that's a conspiracy theory. That just seems like pretty obvious to me. All right, next we have, again, this one. I don't think this is honestly a conspiracy theory. This is just completely obvious. Aljo was set up to lose against Sugar Sean O'Malley. It's no secret that Dana White is not a fan of Aljamain Sterling. You see in press conferences, whenever he gets asked about Aljo, he never really has anything positive to say about him. I understand Aljo, he doesn't come across as the most likable dude, but that's mainly just because he speaks his mind. I'm actually a fan of Aljo. I think I like the way he goes about it. He's a really good fighter. He doesn't seem to want to play the UFC game and take any bullshit from Dana, and Dana is not a fan of that.
Do you want me to explain what's going on in the mind of fucking Aljo?
We all know Sugar Sean O'Malley has a huge online following, mostly with like young TikTokers and stuff like that. So it's no secret that Dana White was pushing for Sean O'Malley to become the UFC champion. The thing is, it seems like this fight was set up in Sean's favour so that he could fast track his way to becoming champion. So Sean and Aljamain fought on August 20th. That date is critical because apart from Volkanovski, Aljo was the only champion to have fought within that 3-month time frame. He fought back in May, which was a 3-month turnaround. There were plenty of other fighters that could have been put on the August 20 card, including Izzy, whose last fight with Pereira was in April. However, they did want him to fight in Australia, so I can kind of see what happened there. Leon Edwards, he fought in March. Why was he not booked for the August fight? That makes zero sense at all. He could have fought Colby in August easily. Jon Jones fought in March as well. Why was he not the one booked? And Islam Makhachev was booked in February. So if you're Aljamain Sterling, you're sitting there going, why am I the one being forced to fight 12 weeks after I just had a 5-round war when all these other fighters are available? What's going on here? I think we know what's going on there. The UFC wanted Aljo to lose his belt and they wanted to start pushing Sean O'Malley as the new champion because he makes a lot more money than Aljo. Charles Oliveira was never planning on fighting Islam Makhachev. Now, this one we have Uncle Chael to thank because he's been saying this for at least 6 months. Charles went out a number of times and said he had no interest in fighting Islam. He didn't want to fight Islam in Abu Dhabi. The conspiracy here, though, I believe, is that the injury, obviously it was a real injury. He had a cut above his eye. But he never planned on fighting Islam. He does not want to fight Islam. And that might sound strange because you're like, well, why would anyone not want to fight for a title? Like, it's a title shot in the UFC. Here's the thing though. Islam's already beaten Charles. I think Charles has a feeling deep down that he can't beat Islam Makhachev. Now, how many title shots does somebody like Charles Oliveira, who isn't a massive draw in the UFC, he doesn't really speak English. Actually, I don't think he speaks English at all. How many title shots are you going to get given? The thing is, Charles has beaten pretty much everybody else in the top 10. So in his mind, and I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying this is the conspiracy theory. Okay, all I have to do is wait for somebody else to beat Islam, then I get my shot and I'm the champion again. Now, whether or not this is true, I don't know. But Chael Sonnen seems pretty adamant that Charles never intended on fighting Islam and will never fight Islam. So that's one conspiracy theory for you. I'm not too sure how I feel about that one. I mean, it kind of makes sense, but then again, it's like, would you really knock back a title shot even if you thought you were probably going to lose? I don't know. Paolo Costa is on the juice. This one's really in plain sight. It feels like Paolo Costa's trolling all of us with his secret juice thing. In fact, it feels like he's trolling USADA more than anybody. But if you have a look at Paolo Costa's career, it is pretty strange. He has had 10 cancelled fights. Think about that. 10 fights that had to be cancelled. Out of Paolo Costa's last 8 fights, 5 of them were cancelled. And he had 2 losses and 1 win against Luke Rockhold, who was just returning to the middleweight division. He's now been booked against Rob Whittaker, who is the number 3 ranked middleweight and former champion, which is a pretty huge fight. The weird thing about Paolo Costa is he was pulled out of his last 2 fights and appears as though he's not that interested in fighting, yet he just signed a massive contract with the UFC, which he hasn't even had a fight on yet. The other strange thing is, he was the most tested athlete in the UFC in 2023. He got tested something like 35 times. To be tested that many times, it's not a coincidence. They clearly have something on you, and it's probably the fact that he's walking around with this secret juice bottle. But is the reason Paolo Costa's pulling out of these fights, again, to do with USADA? And I know I keep going back to this USADA UFC split and the timeline, but the timeline adds up again. It's the same thing as the Jon Jones thing. He pulled out of his last fight the same time that USADA announced their split, and lo and behold, he's booked to fight in February against Rob Whittaker, presumably not needing to go in the USADA testing pool. I could be completely off. Maybe he still does need to go in the USADA testing pool, but as far as the conspiracy theory goes, there's a lot of things pointing towards that being pretty weird. Colby Covington was given a title shot against Leon Edwards so that he would drop his lawsuit against Jorge Masvidal. So we all know what happened between Colby and Jorge. Colby just did his usual antics and went way too far. He ended up beating Jorge in the ring, which probably should have settled it, but Masvidal decided to take it further and attacked him at a restaurant. The cops were called, Jorge was arrested, he was given felony charges, which were actually dropped down to misdemeanor charges after he took a plea deal. The interesting thing about this is that Colby was saying that he received brain injuries as well as I think he got a tooth knocked out or something, which you would think would prevent him from being able to fight in the UFC. In fact, there's no way the UFC could give Colby Covington a contract to fight if he sustained brain injuries recently from an assault, right? And I've seen a lot of people wondering, how the hell does Colby Covington, coming off 2 losses against Kamaru Usman, beating basically a washed up Jorge Masvidal, get the next title shot? He completely jumped the line. In fact, I don't think he's beaten anyone in the welterweight top 10. And then you start to look at it and you think, okay, Colby Covington brings a lot of eyes to the sport and he brings in a lot of money. The UFC want to book Colby Covington a fight, but if he's suing Jorge Masvidal for a brain injury that he sustained from an assault, they're not going to be able to book him a fight. So maybe the UFC went to him and said, if you drop these charges, if you stop telling everybody you got a brain injury, we'll book you a fight. In fact, we'll book you the next title fight and we'll give you a little sweetener as well. They get Masvidal to fight Burns, which brings them in a lot of cash. They get Colby to fight Leon, which brings them in a lot of money. Everybody's happy. Colby doesn't sue Masvidal. The charges are dropped to a misdemeanor from a plea deal. And that's how you end up with Colby Covington putting in that absolutely shit-house performance against Leon Edwards. Shouldn't have even been in the ring. That's why he had so much time off, and that's why he jumped the line over every other contender in the division and got that title shot. I don't know, the evidence is definitely there. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Part of the fun about following the UFC is all these storylines, and I think we'd be naive to think that the UFC isn't pulling some weird strings behind the scenes to make things happen in their favor. Like Dana White, he's a savvy businessman. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Let us know what you think in the comments below, if you think any of these conspiracy theories are true or if you think they're completely far-fetched. And as always, if you enjoy this content, let me know by hitting the like button and subscribe.